The Arachnid Deluge by Tyler Green. I had been glued to my computer screen for what felt like an eternity. The weekend had blurred into a haze of Idra tea and coffee-fueled gaming sessions. Sleep was a distant memory as I pushed through level after level. My eyes burned from the constant glow of the monitor. The room around me faded into obscurity. At first, I barely noticed the occasional tickle on my arm. Stray hair, perhaps, or just my imagination. I absently brushed it away without breaking my focus. The game demanded my full attention. Hours passed in this trance-like state. Tickling sensations grew more frequent. An itch here, a light touch there. Still I remained fixated on the screen before me. And we have enjoined upon man goodness towards his parents. The words of the Quran flashed unbidden through my mind. When was the last time I had called home? Guilt gnawed at me momentarily before being swallowed by the game once more. The itching intensified. Irritation began to break through my concentration. What was going on? Finally, I tore my gaze away from the monitor. I blinked rapidly, trying to focus on the real world. As my vision cleared, I froze in horror. Tiny spiders were crawling across my arms. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. How long had they been there? Where were they coming from? Panic gripped me as I leapt from my chair, sending spiders scattering. My heart raced as I scanned the room wildly. That's when I saw them. Gossamer strands of silk drifting through the air. They seemed to be everywhere, descending from above in an endless rain. I followed their path upwards with growing dread. There in the ceiling was a small hole. The source of this nightmarish infestation? Desperation took hold as I grabbed the nearest aerosol can. Without thinking, I aimed it at the hole and sprayed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then they came. A torrent of spiders poured from the opening. They streamed down the walls in writhing rivers. They filled the air in choking clouds. I screamed, but no sound escaped my throat. The spiders were everywhere, on every surface. In my hair, on my skin. I batted frantically at my body, trying to dislodge the invaders. But for every one I knocked away, 10 more took its place. They just kept coming. Wave after relentless wave. I could feel their tiny legs crawling all over me. In my ears, my nose, my mouth. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world spun around me as panic consumed me entirely. And we have already created man, and know what his soul whispers to him. The Quranic verse echoed in my mind as consciousness began to fade. What sins had I committed to deserve this torment? As darkness closed in, I was left with one final chilling thought. If these were just the babies, where was the mother? The Arachnid Sentinel by Marcus Hill. It had been another long day at the office. My eyes ached from staring at spreadsheets for hours on end. All I wanted was to collapse into bed and forget about the world for a while. The night air was cool against my skin as I trudged up the path to my front door. Streetlights cast long shadows across the lawn. Everything seemed peaceful, normal. I was fumbling for my keys when I felt it, an almost imperceptible resistance as I stepped onto the porch. Before I could process what was happening, I found myself entangled. Sticky strands clung to my face and arms. Instinctively, I began to thrash, trying to free myself from the unseen web. That's when I felt them. Tiny bodies skittering across my skin. Revulsion washed over me as I looked down. My clothes were covered in baby spiders. Dozens of them, maybe more. Their legs tickled as they explored this new territory. I wanted to scream, but fear had frozen my voice. Where had they come from? How many more were there? Panic began to set in as I imagined them crawling into my mouth. My ears, my eyes. With trembling hands, I brushed frantically at my clothes. Spiders went flying in all directions. But there always seemed to be more. An endless supply of 8-legged horrors. That's when I saw them. The parents. Perched on either side of my front door like sentinels. They were massive, each one nearly the size of my outstretched hand. Their eyes glinted in the dim light as they regarded me coldly. And your Lord inspired to the bee, take for yourself among the mountains, houses, and among the trees. And in that which they construct, the Quranic verse flashed through my mind. But these were no benevolent creatures. These were monsters, guarding my home against me. I couldn't bring myself to approach the door. To pass between those chitinous giants. Terror gripped me as I imagined their fangs sinking into my flesh. I turned and ran. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted around to the back of the house. Branches whipped at my face, but I barely noticed. All I could think about were those spiders. Were they pursuing me? I could still feel phantom legs crawling all over my body. I burst through the back door, gasping for air. Without hesitation, I began tearing off my clothes. I had to get them off me. The shower couldn't be hot enough as I scrubbed every inch of my body raw. Water streamed down my face, mixing with tears of relief. But the nightmare wasn't over. As I tilted my head back to rinse my hair, I saw them. Tiny bodies falling from my scalp. More spiders? How many had made it inside with me? How many eggs had they laid? Would I ever truly be free of them? As I huddled on the shower floor, shivering despite the steam, I was left with a terrifying thought. If these creatures could take over my home so icily, what was to stop them from overrunning the entire neighborhood, the entire city? How long before humanity found itself living in a world ruled by spiders? Clutch Beneath, by Zachary Ross. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me as I stumbled into my bedroom. Another late night at work had left me drained. It's both physically and mentally. All I wanted was to plug in my phone and collapse into bed. The familiar comfort of my room should have been soothing, but something felt off, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were watching me from the shadows. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to fatigue. My phone was nearly dead, the red battery icon mocking me. I needed to charge it before morning. Muscle memory took over as I reached beneath the bed, feeling for the familiar cord. My fingers brushed against something unexpected, something soft and yielding. Curiosity overrode caution as I explored the strange object. It was roughly the size of a grapefruit, smooth and slightly warm to the touch. I squeezed it gently, trying to discern its nature. That's when I felt it move. No, not move. Writhe, as if countless tiny bodies were shifting within. Before I could snatch my hand away, I felt them emerge, hundreds of minuscule legs crawling up my arm. A wave of revulsion washed over me. I yanked my arm back with a strangled cry. Even in the dim light I could see them, baby spiders swarming over my skin, their tiny bodies glistening. I shook my arm violently, sending spiders flying in all directions, but more kept coming. An endless stream pouring from beneath the bed. My sanctuary had become a nightmare realm. Every soul will taste death. The Quranic verse echoed in my mind as panic set in. Was this how I was destined to meet my end? Devoured by a horde of arachnids? I scrambled backwards, desperate to put distance between myself and the chitinous flood. My back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to run. The spiders advanced relentlessly, covering every surface. Filling the air with gossamer strands, I screamed for my parents, my voice cracking with terror. Footsteps thundered down the hall. The door burst open, flooding the room with light. For a moment, I dared to hope. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw the truth. The spiders were gone. No trace remained of the horrific scene. Had it all been a hallucination? A waking nightmare born of stress and exhaustion? My parents exchanged worried glances as I babbled about spider sacks and swarms of babies. They tried to reassure me, to convince me it had just been a bad dream. But I knew the truth. I had felt those legs on my skin, that writhing mass beneath my bed. Something was hiding in the darkness, waiting, watching, breeding. As I huddled in the shower, scrubbing my skin raw, I was left with a chilling thought. If I couldn't trust my own senses, my own perception of reality, how could I ever feel safe again? What other horrors might be lurking just beyond the veil of my understanding, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves and plunge my world into chaos? The Thing Beneath the Covers, by Daniel Moore. I've always been a deep sleeper, the kind who could sleep through an earthquake. But that night, something jolted me awake with a start. My heart was racing as I felt an unmistakable sensation. Something huge was crawling around in my bed right next to me. On me. In that hazy state between sleep and wakefulness, my mind raced through possibilities. A rat, a snake, it's a Quranic verse. And among his signs is your sleep by night and by day. Flashed through my mind. But this was no peaceful sleep. This was terror. I leaped out of bed in a panic, flinging the covers off in one swift motion, but there was nothing there. The sheets were smooth and undisturbed. I stood there panting, trying to make sense of it. It had felt so real, the weight, the movement across my skin. Shaken, I eventually convinced myself it must have been a vivid dream, a hallucination as I transitioned from deep sleep. I climbed back into bed, but sleep eluded me. Every slight rustle of the sheets sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. The next night it happened again. This time I felt it distinctly on my arms, thick hairy legs scuttling across my skin. I cried out and jumped from the bed. Heart pounding, I fumbled for the light switch. The sudden brightness revealed nothing out of place. Thoroughly unnerved, I ran to my parents' room. "Dad," I called out, "there's something in my bed." He came groggily, following me back to investigate. He methodically checked under the sheets, under the mattress, behind the headboard. Nothing. "It's just your imagination, son," he said gently. "Try to get some sleep." But I couldn't shake the feeling of those phantom legs crawling over me. Sleep came fitfully that night, punctuated by starts and shivers at every imagined touch. The third night, I was determined to face my fears, to prove to myself it was all in my head. I lay rigidly in bed, every nerve on high alert. Hours passed, my eyes grew heavy. Just as I was drifting off, I felt it again. Something huge was on my arm, moving. This time I didn't hesitate. I flung back the covers, and there it was. The biggest spider I had ever seen. Bigger than my hand. Bigger than a tarantula. Its eyes glinted in the dim light as it froze. For a moment we stared at each other in mutual shock. Then it bolted. Lightning fast, it scurried under the bed, and out of sight I screamed, primal sound of terror that brought my parents running. But by the time they arrived, it was gone. We searched the room top to bottom, moved furniture, checked closets. Nothing. My dad tried to reassure me, told me spiders that big don't live in our area. Must have been a shadow, a trick of the light. But I knew what I had seen. Sleep became impossible after that. Every slight movement, every shadow became a potential threat. I found myself reciting the dua for protection. I seek refuge in the perfect words of Allah from the evil of what He has created. But the fear persisted. Days passed. Exhaustion set in. Still, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that room, to lie vulnerable in that bed where I knew it was waiting, watching. The memory of those gleaming eyes and hairy legs haunted me. We never found any trace of the spider. No web. No droppings. Nothing to prove it had ever existed outside my terrified mind. But to this day, I wonder, what if it's still there, hiding, waiting, ready to crawl out from the shadows when I least expect it? Face on the Pillow by Stephen Bryant. The old farmhouse creaked and settled as I trudged up the narrow stairs. My muscles ached from a long day of hard labor helping my uncle with the harvest. All I wanted was to collapse into bed and sleep for days. The guest room was small and stuffy. A rickety iron bed frame took up most of the space. I flopped onto the lumpy mattress, not even bothering to change. The ancient TV in the corner flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across the faded wallpaper. After a few minutes of mindless channel surfing, my eyelids grew heavy. The heat was stifling. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I tossed and turned, seeking a comfortable position. I flipped the pillow, searching for the cool side. As I laid my head back down, something felt wrong. Instead of the soft give of down feathers, I felt something firm, unyielding, and unmistakably alive. In that moment of horrified realization, time seemed to slow to a crawl. I felt coarse hair brush against my cheek, the subtle shift of something massive beneath me, and then 8 razor-sharp points of pressure as massive legs unfurled. Before I could even draw breath to scream, it moved. I flung myself backwards, tumbling off the bed in a tangle of sheets. There on my pillow sat the largest spider I had ever seen. Its body alone was the size of a dinner plate. 8 gleaming eyes reflected the flickering TV light as it regarded me with alien intelligence. For a moment we were frozen in a tableau of mutual shock. Then, with impossible speed, it scuttled away, vanishing into the shadows. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. Where had it gone? Was it still in the room with me? I backed slowly towards the door, eyes darting to every corner. The words of the Prophet Muhammad echoed in my mind. If you kill a spider in the first attempt, you will be given a reward for killing it because it is harmful. And if you kill it on the second attempt, you will be given a reward, and also a sin will be recorded. But this was no ordinary spider. This was a monster. As I reached for the doorknob, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something massive and dark detached itself from the ceiling directly above me. I didn't wait to see more. I burst out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My panicked shouts brought my uncle and grandmother running. But when we returned armed with brooms and bug spray, there was no sign of the creature. We searched every inch of that tiny room. Nothing. To this day, I wonder if it was real or some fever dream brought on by exhaustion and heat. But sometimes late at night, I still feel that phantom touch, those 8 points of pressure, and I wonder, where did it go? Is it still there, lurking in the shadows of my grandmother's house? Waiting. And in those moments, I find myself whispering the dua for protection. I seek refuge with Allah from Satan, the accursed. But deep down I know, no prayer can fully banish the memory of that night. The night I came face to face with a nightmare made flesh.